Well, we're here for another Sunday, and this week we received the word that our stay-at-home order has been extended, and so it looks like, at least at this time, that the earliest that we might have church again would be May 17th, and even then we know that we are going to need to do some things differently. And so, man, this is disappointing. There are a lot of disappointments in this season. And I know for some of you, disappointment includes things like family vacations that had to be rescheduled. There are wedding plans that were canceled. I heard that there have been weddings that took place over Zoom. And some of you have lost people that you love dearly, family members, friends that have passed away during this season. The disappointment for some comes from questions. Companies that will not survive, companies that will not be in existence on the other side of this season. For some, it's a question whether or not there will be a job. What are we going to do about employment after this? And I know that there are some who would say it's had a greater impact on us personally at home. I don't know if our marriage is going to survive this. We are not doing well. Financially, the impact, I don't know if we will be able to keep our house, keep our home on the other side of this. Well, as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and it's a story that really moves along quickly. Disappointment, bitterness, circumstances that are out of control. In the little short book of Ruth, just a few chapters in the Old Testament, and this is condensed and it moves quickly, and we're not given explanations. In the very first verse of the book of Ruth, we simply read these words: "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land." The people didn't cause the famine. They didn't control the famine. And that played out in a variety of ways. It can happen over a period of years sometimes. We plant the seeds, we plant the grain, and we keep a portion to live off from, and the next thing you know, the harvest was minimal. And there's barely enough for another year. And we read here that there was a man in Judah together with his wife and 2 sons, and it simply tells us that they, due to this famine, took off, left, and went to the country of Moab. And the man's name was Elimelech. And his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they went to Moab, it says simply, and they lived there, I believe with the intentions that when the famine was over, that they would go back home. And then in the 3rd verse we read, just simply, we don't know, we're not given any explanation, but it simply says, "Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And in the bitterness of losing her husband, in that culture, it was a really good thing that she had the 2 sons, because that was kind of like a pension or Social Security might be to us. If you had a couple of sons or 3 or 4 sons, you were rich. And so there was potentially some good news in the midst of this disappointment, the disappointment of the famine and the disappointment of losing her husband. And those boys of hers married Moabite women while they were there in the land of Moab. And one of them was named Orpah and the other Ruth. And it's kind of interesting because if my memory serves me right, I believe in 1954 in Mississippi, a little baby girl was born, and she was named after Orpah from the Book of Ruth. But somehow in the process, the name got spelled wrong, and hence many of you recognize the name of Oprah, who became well known in this country of ours. And they lived there for about 10 years. And then we simply read again, we don't know what happened. We get no explanation. It says they lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her sons and without her husband. And she heard that back home, that the Lord had provided food. And so she decided, I'm going to go back home in this season. And so they prepared, got ready to go, and as they were preparing, she said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, said, there's no sense in you going with me. Why don't you go back home to your mothers? I am not going to have any more sons. And even if in my old age I could have more sons, you're not going to hang around and wait for them to become old enough to marry. Go back home. And we simply read here that she kissed them and they wept out loud and told her, said, no, we're going to stay with you. And she just said, no, that's not the thing to do. And I want you to see what happened here, because something was going on in Naomi's heart in the season. And bitterness, a root of bitterness began to develop within her. And you'll notice that she says here in the 13th verse of the first chapter of Ruth, she said, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. In other words, it would seem that she blames God for what's going on there in her life. And as she arrives, in fact, she arrives back in Judah, some of the family, friends, and relatives see her coming, and they cry out, hey, can this be Naomi? And her response is going to be, don't call me Naomi. I am not the person that I used to be. Just call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Listen to these words. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. And I wonder, when we move forward, when we arrive on the other side of this particular situation that we're in right now, where will our hearts be? What will our condition be spiritually? What will our relationship with Christ be? Are you questioning? Are you wondering, where is God in this time and in this season? Well, this is a wonderful story, and this is a great time to dig out your Old Testament and open it to the story and read what really happens here as this story plays out. But I want you to notice what happens, because Orpah returns back to her home, but Ruth made a different decision. And Ruth's decision would be stated in words that have been repeated often over and over again. In fact, today, her words still become part of wedding ceremonies very often, because Ruth made a decision not to be bitter, a decision not to blame God, a decision to embrace something different. And her words read like this. She says to Naomi, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Don't try to make me do that. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, that's where I'm going to stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. In other words, she's saying here, we're family. And this matters. Our relationship matters. Our love matters. And whatever happens, we're together in this time, in this season. And I'm going to suggest to you that literally because of the decision that Ruth made, her story not only has been included in the pages of our Bibles, but it's been told over and over and over again, because it's a story about a heart that is moved in the right direction. It is a story about making right decisions in seasons of difficulty and bitterness, because faithfulness matters. And faithfulness can be boring. Faithfulness is sometimes difficult. Faithfulness can be extremely grueling sometimes. But faithfulness always wins. I'm going to say again, take a few minutes, open your Bibles, read through the rest of the story. Because when we are faithful, and when we make decisions not to be bitter, but to embrace the things that matter the most, out of those decisions, God is able to work in ways that we could not have imagined, that we would not have expected. And He will do things that are beyond our wildest imaginations. Because truly, even in this season, God is faithful. And He has plans and purposes for you that are absolutely plans and purposes that are for good and for growth and maturity and for a future with Him back home, because that's ultimately That's ultimately his plan for all of us.